February 1944. Deep over the heart of Germany. The sky is a pale, frozen blue as Luftwaffe pilots climb through the thinning air. Engines straining, white contrails carving sharp lines across the horizon. Below them, distant American bombers thunder steadily eastward to far inside German territory, too deep for their escorts to still be present. The German pilots know the pattern well. The bombers always arrive alone. Their escorts always turn back. Today should be no different. But as the fighters level off and prepare to strike, something catches their eye. Small, sleek shapes gliding effortlessly in tight formation. Sunlight flashing off their long wings. It can't be. Not here. Not this far. Not this deep. Yet there they are. P-51 Mustangs. Still with the bombers. Still escorting. Still ready to fight. A stunned German pilot radios the others, disbelief cracking in his voice. The assumption that had protected the Luftwaffe for years collapses in a single instant. The Americans had brought a fighter all the way to Berlin, and from that moment on, the war in the skies over Europe would never be the same. In the early years of the air war over Europe, the skies belonged to no one. American bombers pushed deeper into German territory each month, but for every mile gained, the cost climbed higher. The B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator were built for endurance, rugged machines capable of absorbing heavy damage, yet even they struggled against the relentless pressure of the Luftwaffe's fighter defenses. By 1942, American air doctrine held a dangerous assumption: type bomber formation and heavy defensive machine guns would be enough to protect the fleet. The theory sounded convincing on paper. In practice, it proved deadly. As soon as bombers crossed into central Germany, their escort fighters were forced to turn back. The P-47 Thunderbolt and P-38 Lightning were formidable aircraft, but their fuel limits made the deepest parts of the Reich unreachable. German pilots understood this limitation with absolute clarity. Their entire defensive strategy relied on it. Every major industrial center, Schweinfurt, Regensburg, Bremen, Leipzig, lay far beyond the protective reach of American escorts. Luftwaffe command simply waited until the last U.S. fighter turned home, then sent wave after wave of Bf-109s and Fw-190s to tear into the unprotected bombers. For German airmen, the moment escorts disappeared was almost ritualistic. Referred to grimly but confidently as the bomber's hour of death, Americans learned this lesson painfully. On October 14, 1943, remembered as Black Thursday, the second Schweinfurt raid resulted in the loss of 60 bombers and hundreds of airmen. The message was clear: without long-range escort, the daylight bombing campaign might collapse entirely. But the United States refused to abandon daylight precision bombing. They needed a fighter that could fly farther, higher, and faster, a machine that could escort bombers from England all the way to Berlin and back. It seemed impossible. Meanwhile, the British Air Ministry had been testing a new American airframe produced by North American Aviation, the experimental P-51 Mustang. Initially powered by an Allison engine, the aircraft showed promise but lacked high-altitude performance. The breakthrough came when engineers installed the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same power plant used in the legendary Spitfire. What emerged was unlike anything in the skies: a fighter that was agile at low altitudes, powerful at high altitudes, incredibly fuel efficient, and capable of carrying drop tanks that extended its range to unprecedented distances. By late 1943, the P-51 Mustang was ready. The Luftwaffe, still confident in the long-range gap that safeguarded their heartland, had no idea that a new American fighter was about to erase it entirely. The assumptions that shaped German strategy for years were about to collapse. And when the Mustangs finally entered the deep escort mission, German pilots would find themselves facing a reality they never believed possible. The arrival of the P-51 Mustang did not happen with the noise of fanfare, but with the quiet precision of engineering meeting necessity. The challenges that crippled American deep strike missions were well understood. Escort fighters burned too much fuel, lost too much power at high altitude, and were forced to abandon the bombers before the most dangerous part of the mission. The Luftwaffe counted on this. Their defensive network, from radar stations to clustered fighter bases, was designed around the certainty that American fighters could not follow their bombers all the way. The Mustang broke that certainty. Key was the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, manufactured under license by Packard in the United States. It transformed the P-51 from a capable low-altitude aircraft into a high-altitude predator. The engine's two-stage supercharger allowed the Mustang to climb and fight at the same altitudes as the B-17s and B-24s, where the air was thin and brutally cold. More importantly, its fuel efficiency at cruise power was exceptional, far superior to the thirsty engines of the P-47 or P-38. But the feature that stunned German pilots most profoundly was the Mustang's ability to carry drop tanks to external fuel pods that could be jettisoned when empty. These tanks extended the Mustang's combat radius by hundreds of miles, giving it a reach no fighter in the world had achieved before. American planners understood the implications immediately for the first time. They could design bombing missions without relying on the uncertain hope of surviving the unescorted portion. With Mustangs, bombers could enjoy continuous protection from takeoff to target and back again, a complete reversal of the rules that had governed the air war. The Luftwaffe, however, learned this only through bitter experience. As the first P-51 units arrived in England in late 1943, German intelligence noted their presence but did not fully comprehend their capabilities. They viewed the Mustang as just another Allied fighter, sleek, fast, dangerous, but still bound by the same limits of fuel and geography. That assumption collapsed in March 1944. On a mission toward Berlin, Luftwaffe pilots rose to intercept what they believed would be vulnerable American bombers. But instead of finding terrified bomber crews bracing for attack, they found themselves confronted by fresh, aggressive, long-range escorts, Mustangs that should not have been there. This moment shattered German confidence. Their carefully calculated interception plans relied on predictable timing. Suddenly, the Americans were unpredictable. The Mustang's presence forced the Luftwaffe into constant defensive action. Fighter units now had to scramble earlier, climb faster, and face opponents they did not expect. Fuel calculations that once determined the rhythm of battle no longer applied. Even experienced aces misjudged the Mustang's range, entering dogfights assuming the Americans must soon turn back, only to find the escorts still there, still waiting. The strategic balance shifted in months. The weapon that Germany did not believe the Americans could build had arrived, and in the skies over Europe, disbelief would soon turn into fear for American fighter pilots. The first long-range escort missions felt like stepping into unknown airspace. These were not short, violent encounters near the Channel. These were 8-hour flights across Europe, over forest, rivers, factory town, and heavily defended industrial centers. Pilots battled bitter cold, oxygen starvation, and the constant threat of engine failure far from friendly territory. Yet beneath the tension, something remarkable stirred, the realization that they could finally protect the bombers all the way. Previously, escort pilots had been forced to turn back, watching bombers disappear into the distance like condemned ghosts. Many felt guilt, knowing what awaited those crews once German fighters attacked in overwhelming waves. The P-51 Mustang changed that. For the first time, American pilots flew deep into the Reich, to Leipzig, Augsburg, Berlin, side by side with the men they were sworn to shield. Pilots described the feeling as liberating, even emotional. They no longer abandoned the bombers at the edge of their endurance. They escorted them through the most dangerous moments of the war. And when German fighters finally appeared, expecting unprotected formations, Mustang pilots saw something rare: surprise. The enemy had not expected them to be there. That advantage, combined with the Mustang's speed, climb rate, and high-altitude performance, allowed American pilots to take the initiative. What had once been a desperate defensive struggle became an assertive, controlled offensive, driven by aircraft that could go the distance. For German fighter pilots, the first close encounter with long-range Mustangs was disorienting. Their entire defense system was built around strict timing. Radar stations tracked approaching formations. Command centers calculated interception windows. And fighter units launched based on one assumption: the American escort would turn back. Before reaching central Germany, that assumption had held true for years. It shaped German strategy, morale, and confidence. So, when Mustangs appeared over Berlin, Munich, Hamburg, and Leipzig, the disbelief was immediate. Pilots who had scrambled expecting bombers now found themselves face-to-face with aggressive escorts, fresh, fast, and more maneuverable at altitude than the Bf-109 or FW-190. German pilot accounts reveal the shock. They expected exhausted bombers. They found alert fighters. They expected isolated targets. They found coordinated American formations. They expected to dominate the deep skies of Germany. They found themselves hunted. The psychological blow was immense. Mustangs pursued German fighters far beyond the bombers, diving into combat with energy advantage and superior climb. Some German pilots radioed warnings back to their bases. The Americans have a fighter with impossible range. Mission after mission, the Mustang stripped the Luftwaffe of the one advantage it still held: control of German airspace. What had once been a predictable battlefield dissolved into chaos, surprise, and escalating losses. And for the first time, many German pilots sensed the war in the air slipping beyond recovery. The Mustang's impact went far beyond shock. It rewrote the tactics of the entire European air campaign. Before its rival, bomber formations were forced to endure mass German attacks launched with precision timing. Interceptors would climb in coordinated groups, targeting the bombers' weak points with cannon fire and rocket attacks. With Mustangs in the mix, the calculus changed. American escorts no longer hugged the bomber formations defensively. Under General Jimmy Doolittle's new doctrine, they received permission to leave the bombers and seek out the Luftwaffe proactively. The Mustang's range allowed it to fly ahead of bomber streams, clearing the skies and catching German fighters during climb or assembly moments when they were most vulnerable. Suddenly, it was the Luftwaffe who found themselves reacting. Their interceptors, once confident in their timing, were now ambushed before they could organize. Escort missions shifted from passive protection to offensive sweeps, eroding German fighters' strength. Mission after mission, the Mustang also changed high-altitude dynamics. Its laminar-flow wing and Merlin engine allowed it to maneuver at altitude where other aircraft struggled. It could dive faster than a 109 and climb more cleanly than a 190, giving it control over the vertical dimension of battle, a decisive advantage in dogfighting. By spring 1944, the Luftwaffe's defensive rhythm had collapsed. The Mustang had replaced chaos with order, American order, in the skies over Europe. When German engineers first examined crashed P-51 Mustangs, they were stunned by what they found. The aircraft embodied a combination of design choices that, taken together, created a fighter with capabilities previously thought incompatible: speed, altitude performance, maneuverability, endurance, and firepower. The heart of the machine was the Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. Engineered with a two-stage supercharger that maintained power at high altitudes where the B-17s and B-24s operated. Unlike the Bf-109's engine, which struggled as air-thin, the Merlin delivered steady thrust and efficient fuel burn. This allowed the Mustang to climb and cruise with unmatched balance. The Mustang's laminar flow wing was another revelation. Its unique thickness distribution reduced drag dramatically, especially during high-speed flight. German aerodynamicists recognized the design but had not implemented it on a fighter. In the same refined way, combined with flush riveting and a streamlined profile, the P-51 achieved incredible fuel efficiency, the key to its record-breaking range. Then there were the drop tanks, simple yet revolutionary, made of paper or metal. They extended the Mustang's operational distance by hundreds of miles. German fighters used drop tanks as well, but their engines consumed far more fuel, and the tanks themselves were less efficient. The Mustang's entire aerodynamic system was built to take advantage of this extended reach. German pilots initially assumed the Americans had deployed multiple fighter types with overlapping ranges. The truth was more shocking. One aircraft, one design, one leap in engineering had swept aside their defensive assumptions. In modern terms, the Mustang was not just a weapon. It was a technological disruption that German pilots never saw coming. Technology alone did not win the skies over Europe. It was the shift in American air doctrine, led by General Jimmy Doolittle, that transformed the Mustang from a long-range escort into an offensive spearhead. Before 1944, U.S. fighter pilots were required to stay with the bombers at all times. They formed tight defensive rings, reacting to German attacks rather than preventing them. Doolittle understood that this approach ceded initiative to the Luftwaffe. As long as German fighters could choose when and where to attack, the bombers would suffer heavy losses. The Mustang gave Doolittle the flexibility he needed. Its range allowed escorts to operate far ahead of the bombers, hunting German fighters before they could form attack groups. Under his new doctrine, fighters were ordered to break free from bombers, sweep enemy airspace aggressively, attack Luftwaffe formations on the ground and in the air, destroy German aircraft during takeoff, landing, or climb. These fighter sweeps devastated the Luftwaffe. Experienced German pilots, already strained by years of attrition, now faced surprise attacks at moments they had previously considered safe. Doolittle's order turned the Mustang into a strategic weapon, not just a tactical one. The Luftwaffe lost aircraft faster than they could be replaced, and more critically, they lost veteran pilots whose experience could never be recreated. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe was no longer a shield. It was a fractured force fighting for survival. Beyond tactics and technology, the Mustang delivered a profound psychological blow to the Luftwaffe. German pilots were trained to believe they controlled the deep skies of the Reich. Those airspaces were their home turf, a sphere of certainty where American fighters could not follow. The Mustang erased that mental boundary. Reports from German squadrons described the same shocking moments: Mustangs appearing over Berlin, Mustangs pursuing damaged fighters all the way to their bases, Mustangs circling high above the bombers instead of turning back at the expected point. These sightings were more than tactical surprises, they were existential ones. For the first time, Luftwaffe pilots felt hunted in their own skies. The belief that they possessed a geographical advantage collapsed. Panic bled into radio calls. Veteran aces described Mustangs arriving where no escort should be, catching them during climb or intercept, robbing them of time, altitude, and control. The psychological effect rippled through command structures. If the Americans had a fighter that could reach Berlin, Leipzig, Munich, and beyond, then there was no remaining sanctuary. No industrial center was safe, no bomber corridor was predictable, no defensive plan could be trusted. This realization, more than fuel shortages, more than attrition, more than allied production power, marked the beginning of the Luftwaffe's end. The air war was no longer a contest of equals. It had become a one-sided struggle against an enemy with greater range, greater numbers, and unrelenting pressure. March 6, 1944, the day that changed the air war. Before dawn, American airfields across England roared to life as hundreds of B-17s and B-24s prepared for one of the most ambitious raids of the war, a direct strike on Berlin. It was a target so deep, so heavily defended, that previous attempts had been disastrous. But this time, the mission planners had a new piece of the puzzle, the P-51 Mustang. At briefing rooms across bases, bomber crews stared at the mission map in disbelief. The red lines stretched farther than any of them had ever seen. Yet the Escort line, drawn in chalk, looping across the North Sea and into the heart of Germany, extended just as far. This time, they would not be alone. As formation after formation climbed into the cold morning sky, German radar networks detected them. Signals crackled through Luftwaffe command post, summoning fighter groups to scramble. The predictable rhythm of battle seemed ready to unfold once again. But something was different. High above the bomber stream, riding thin currents of icy wind, flew long, sleek silhouettes the Germans had not expected to see so deep over their homeland. Mustangs, entire groups of them diving, climbing, weaving effortlessly at altitudes where German engines struggled. At Jagdgeschwader 11's airfield near Bremen, pilots raced to their aircraft. Many assumed they were intercepting unprotected bombers, but as they cleared the clouds and saw the size of the incoming American formation, something fell off. The bombers were flying too steadily, too confidently. Then, out of the sun, Mustangs swept down. The first attack was brutal in its precision. American pilots, having descended from higher altitude with an energy advantage, tore into the climbing German fighters. Dozens of Bf-109s and Fw-190s were caught mid-ascent, their slow climb leaving them vulnerable. The radio filled with frantic shouts as pilots tried to warn each other. One German veteran later wrote, "They should not have been there. At that range, we believed it impossible." But the Mustangs were not only there, they were thriving. While some escorted the bomber stream, others roamed far ahead, diving onto German interceptors before they could form attack waves. The Luftwaffe's carefully coordinated defensive system, relied upon for years, collapsed in minutes. Fighter groups were scattered, disorganized, overwhelmed. For the bomber crews, it was surreal. Instead of watching helplessly as German fighters swarmed their formations, they saw Mustangs streak across the sky, chasing attackers away, breaking up coordinated assaults, restoring a sense of protection. They had never felt this deep into enemy territory. As the American formations pushed farther toward Berlin, the Luftwaffe realized the magnitude of the crisis. Additional fighter wings were scrambled, hoping to regroup and attack closer to the target. But the Mustangs were waiting there too, orbiting, refueling from their external tanks, ready for another engagement. Everywhere German pilots turned, the long-range escorts appeared out above them, behind them, cutting across their escape paths. This was no longer a defensive struggle for survival. It was a coordinated dismantling of the Luftwaffe's interceptor, forced out by midday. As the bombers released their payloads over the industrial outskirts of Berlin, German pilots faced a truth that many had long feared but never admitted. The Americans now possessed a fighter capable of controlling the air over Germany itself. And this was only the beginning. What happened on March 6, 1944, was devastating for the Luftwaffe, but it was only the opening strike of a larger collapse. Within weeks came a sequence of operations that German pilots would remember with dread. Big Week. From February 20th to February 25th, 1944, the U.S. 8th and 15th Air Forces launched massive coordinated raids against aircraft factories in Leipzig, Regensburg, Gotha, and Augsburg. For the first time, every one of these strikes carried a new, terrifying variable for the defenders. The escorts never left. Luftwaffe pilots scrambled again and again, expecting gaps in the American protection. Instead, they found Mustangs at every altitude, every angle of approach, and every critical interception corridor. The German strategy, built around precise timing and coordination, was dismantled mission by mission. The air war turns offensive for the Americans under General Doolittle's new doctrine. American fighters no longer waited near the bombers. They surged ahead aggressively, diving on German formations as they assembled. This destroyed the Luftwaffe's ability to conduct mass-coordinated attacks. Their only effective tactic against bomber streams, Mustangs patrolled German skies with unprecedented freedom, intercepting fighters at takeoff, strafing airfield, pursuing damaged aircraft into landing patterns, attacking fuel depots and repair shops for German pilots who survived these encounters. The shock was profound. The skies they once controlled now belonged to someone else. Even their home bases were no longer safe. A Luftwaffe ace later wrote, "We rose to defend our cities, but already the Americans were there, waiting for us." Numbers tell the story. The fast-estimating Big Week alone, the Luftwaffe lost over 600 fighters, many flown by veteran pilots. The Americans lost bombers, but far fewer than expected. And the Mustangs themselves proved remarkably difficult to shoot down. The battle of attrition that the Allies desired, draining the Luftwaffe's strength faster than Germany could replace it, had begun. And the Mustangs were its primary instrument. The psychological breakpoint is the Mustangs continued their deep penetrations. A devastating realization spread through German air units. The Americans had solved the range problem. The one strategic limitation that had protected the Reich's interior was gone. Germany's aircraft factories, fuel refineries, and transportation hubs were now exposed. Their defensive shields shattered. Pilots returning from combat were exhausted, shaken, and increasingly fatalistic. Many described feeling hunted even when they were the ones scrambling to intercept. The P-51's presence at the far edge of its range, still fast, still maneuverable, still lethal, had a demoralizing effect unmatched by any earlier Allied fighter. German pilots who once entered battle with confidence now hesitated, aware that the Mustangs would be waiting for them at every altitude. The moment the Luftwaffe realized the war was lost be late spring of 1944. The Luftwaffe had been broken as an effective fighting force. Its losses in trained pilots were catastrophic. Germany's industrial production plummeted. Fighter groups could no longer form cohesive responses. Air superiority, once fiercely contested, now leaned decisively toward the Allies. And the shock that started it all remained unforgettable. Long-range American fighters, appearing where they had no right to be. German pilots had built their strategies, their training, even their morale around the assumption that American escort fighters couldn't reach Berlin, Leipzig, or Munich, but the Mustang proved that assumption fatally wrong. The sky is over. Germany now belonged to the American, and the path to D-Day opened because of it. When the Mustang first appeared over central Germany, the Luftwaffe considered it a disruption. By the spring of 1944, they understood it was something far worse, a turning point they could not reverse. The effects of the P-51's arrival rippled through every level of German air command. Fighter groups that once launched confidently into predictable interception patterns now scrambled in fragmented waves, responding to threats from multiple directions. Pilots who once dictated the tempo of battle found themselves reacting defensively, often too late. The collapse of the Luftwaffe's veteran corps. Perhaps the most devastating consequence was the loss of experienced German airmen. Throughout 1944, the Luftwaffe faced relentless pressure. Every interception attempt meant facing fresh American escorts equipped with superior range, better high-altitude performance, and increasingly aggressive tactics. Veteran pilots, the heart of Germany's aerial expertise, were being shot down faster than they could be replaced. By mid-1944, many squadrons were losing more than half their pilots every month. Replacement pilots were being rushed into combat with only minimal training. Aircraft shortages compounded the crisis as factories came under sustained attack. American planners understood this dynamic. They knew that aircraft could be rebuilt, but skill could not. Every German pilot lost over the Reich was a blow that Germany could never recover from. A new reality for American bomber crews. The effect was immediate and emotional. The fear that had haunted them in 1943, the torment of watching German fighters carve into their formations with impunity, began to fade. With Mustangs at their side, mission briefings felt different. The long, red route lines on maps no longer meant inevitable slaughter. During raids on Berlin, Leipzig, and Munich, bomber crews reported seeing far fewer organized attacks. Instead, they witnessed scattered German fighters making desperate, poorly coordinated attempts before being driven off by roving Mustang patrols. The statistics told the story clearly. Bomber loss rates dropped dramatically. More crews completed their tour missions. Morale across bomber groups soared for the first time. In the European Air War, the Americans controlled not only the offensive strategy but the overall rhythm of combat. The industrial consequence: Germany's factories exposed with the Mustang, breaking the Luftwaffe's defensive shield. American bombers could finally reach the factories Germany depended upon: ball-bearing plants, aircraft production centers, fuel refineries, engine factories, transportation hubs. Raids that followed were not symbolic. They were crippling. Aircraft assembly lines slowed. Engine output plummeted. Refineries burned for days at a time. The Luftwaffe's ability to rebuild its fighter strength eroded mission by mission. German commanders recognized the scale of the disaster. Even if they produced new aircraft, they no longer had the fuel or trained pilots to fly them effectively. Every Mustang escort mission deepened a crisis the Luftwaffe lacked the resources to solve. The emotional toll on German pilots' accounts from surviving Luftwaffe aces reveal a sense of inevitability. They described exhaustion, dread, and disbelief. Many had flown since 1939, but nothing prepared them for a fighter that could match them everywhere, including the skies above their own bases. One German pilot later wrote, "It was not only the speed or the range. It was the knowledge that they would always be there for a force built on confidence and precision." That realization was crushing. The air war's balance had shifted permanently, and the full consequences were only beginning to unfold. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was no longer the force it had been in the early years of the war. What once dominated the skies over Europe now struggled merely to survive. And at the heart of this collapse was the unmistakable presence of the P-51 Mustang, a fighter that erased distances, shattered expectations, and broke the final defensive barrier Germany relied upon. This strategic shift, air superiority, becomes inevitable with the Luftwaffe weakened. American and Allied planners gained something they had never fully possessed before: predictability. They could plan missions knowing their bombers would have Escort at every stage. They could launch raids deep into Germany with confidence. They could even choose targets based on strategic importance rather than survivability. This shift enabled some of the most consequential operations of the war: the systematic targeting of oil refineries, which choked Germany's fuel supply, the bombing of transportation routes, crippling military logistics, massive disruption of aircraft and engine production, continuous pressure on airfields, reducing German sortie rates dramatically. With every raid, the Luftwaffe's ability to resist diminished. What had once been a deadly contest of attrition had become a one-sided dismantling. The road to D-Day opens early 1944. The Allies were preparing for Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. For such an operation to succeed, one condition was non-negotiable: Allied air superiority. Without control of the skies, German reinforcements could have moved freely. Luftwaffe bombers could have attacked landing beaches. The invasion fleet would have been vulnerable. The Mustang helped ensure none of that happened, by sweeping German fighters from the skies and crippling Germany's ability to replace losses. The P-51 played a pivotal role in guaranteeing that. On June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe's presence over Normandy was minimal. German pilots who attempted to respond were intercepted long before they reached the coast. Some never even made it off their runways. D-Day succeeded in part because the skies belonged to the Allies. Post-war legacy: a fighter that redefined air power after the war. Analysts from both sides examined the Mustang's impact. What they concluded was clear: the P-51 was not just another fighter. It was the weapon that made strategic bombing viable. Its combination of range, speed, maneuverability, and altitude performance had no equal during the conflict, and its psychological impact on both American and German pilots was immense. German engineers studied crashed Mustangs with fascination. American pilots wrote memoirs praising its handling, reliability. Military historians consistently ranked it among the most influential aircraft of the war. The Mustang went on to serve in Korea, fly with multiple nations, and become an enduring symbol of American aviation achievement. A final consequence: the end of German air dominance. Long before the tanks of the Red Army reached Berlin, long before Allied troops crossed the Rhine, Germany had already lost control of its skies. That loss made everything that followed possible. And when the Luftwaffe surviving pilots reflected on the turning point, they did not speak of bombers or flak or even overwhelming numbers. They spoke of one moment: the day they looked out across the frozen air over Germany and saw American fighters, far beyond the range any fighter should reach, diving toward them with unmistakable intent. The day they realized the war in the air was no longer theirs. In the long history of warfare, few machines have altered the course of events as decisively as the P-51 Mustang. It did not win the war alone, nor did it erase the terrible cost of the air campaign, but it brought something that had been missing for far too long: balance, precision, and control over a battlefield measured not in miles, but in altitude and endurance. The Mustang became more than a fighter. It became the answer to a question that had haunted Allied planners for years: how do you strike the heart of an enemy who believes distance is their shield? By bridging that distance, the Mustang reshaped the very geometry of war. German pilots, long accustomed to defending their homeland with certainty, found themselves confronting an adversary that refused to turn back. American bomber crews, once resigned to unprotected suffering deep over Germany, finally saw friendly aircraft beside them when they needed them most. But beyond the strategies and statistics, the Mustang story is ultimately human. It is the story of exhausted bomber crews, watching sleek fighters sweep away danger they once faced alone. It is the story of German pilots, glimpsing an aircraft they believed impossible, realizing that the balance of the air war had shifted irrevocably. It is the story of engineers, test pilots, and factory workers, pushing the limits of design and endurance to produce something greater than any one of them. And it is the story of a moment, repeated across countless missions, when two aircraft spiraled through thin, freezing air, fighting not just over territory, but over the future trajectory of the war itself. The P-51 Mustang endures today not simply because it was effective, but because it represented the turning point when the skies over Europe changed hands. A machine built to cross impossible distances ended up shortening the longest war humanity had ever known. In its wings, range, and relentless presence, it carried a message that echoed across the conflict: there was no place left for the Luftwaffe to hide.